What would you do if you found the cure to death? Now, before you make a decision, I suggest that you listen to this cautionary tale. In the facts in the case of M. Valdemir by Edgar Allan Poe, we follow the story of a man who finds such a cure, but isn't all too pleased with what he discovers. This story is intended for a mature audience. I've always been a man of logic and reason, of math and science. Religion was nothing more than fairy tales for children, and magic was nothing more than a trick of the mind on idiots. However, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't one aspect of magic that interested me. A few months ago, I read in an article about a man that came back from death for 4 minutes. But the most surprising thing was, it wasn't through medicine or any kind of medical technology, but through hypnosis of all things. I laughed at this at first, considering it nothing more than a tall tale brought on by the media to gain readers. But as time went on, I found myself becoming more and more intrigued by this. Eventually, I decided that I'd test this out for myself, on a willing patient, of course. As luck would have it, an old colleague of mine, Mr. M. Valdemar, was a few short weeks of dying from a terminal illness. I asked him if he'd allow me to run some experiments on him, and he agreed, thankfully. I was rushed to his side mere moments before his demise. I told him to relax and let everything just sink in. It was his moment. It was my moment. We'd discover once and for all if immortality was truly attainable. I pulled out a chain with a gold watch on it. I brought it up to Mr. Valdemar's face and started swinging it back and forth so slowly enough that he could follow it. Mr. Valdemar, I told him, when I snap my fingers, you shall die. When I snap them again, you will come back to life. He was dead in an instant. I had my assistants examine him to make sure there were no signs of life, such as a pulse or perhaps any blood rushing. He was by all legal terms dead, which is what makes the next part so baffling to me. A couple hours passed, and I decided that it was time to wake him up. I pulled out my watch, leaned in, started to swing it. Mr. Valdemar, I told him, I'm about to snap my fingers. When I do, you shall awake. The corpse rose up. I jumped back in terror, horrified by what I was just seeing. Mr. Valdemar, I slowly said, are you awake? Yes, he replied. Now let me sleep. Very well. The body fell back into the bed. I was confused. How was this possible? Everything that I'd studied for years was being questioned right before my eyes. I had to run more experiments to make absolutely sure that this wasn't some kind of hoax or some prank. It was true. The corpse of Mr. Valdemar kept waking up every time I'd snap my fingers. And yet, he was still dead by legal definitions. The heart wasn't beating, the brain wasn't working, nothing. So how was he responding to us? Eventually, I decided that enough was enough. Let this poor soul suffer no longer. I woke him up one last time to ask him if he really was with us. He always said yes, and begged us to let him sleep. Eventually, I let him sleep forever. I pulled out my watch, leaned in, and told him, Mr. Valdemar, when I snap my fingers, you shall be dead. I truly appreciate everything that you've done.
Nothing happened. Dead silence.
I put my head to his chest just to make sure.
The corpse rose up in agony, screaming. You should have let me die. Blood, pus, everything just went over the bed and the floor. His body decomposed into pools of blood and pus. I told my assistants to never say a word of what they just saw, to keep it to themselves.
For anybody who may be listening to this story,
I beg you to never seek out immortality. It is an unnatural thing. We have no right to play God.